My name is Tim Buell. You're listening to Your Good Get Better. This is a podcast about drums, music, and life. And today on the show, we have Stanton Moore, who's a phenomenal drummer. And I've actually had the pleasure of working with Stanton for several years. So it was really fun to sit down for a more extended conversation. In this conversation, we talk about a whole host of things, like how to develop your own sound, ways to take ideas from the practice room to a gig, how to create your own opportunities and create work for yourself in music. We talk about Stanton's philosophy on swing and how to feel the in the cracks swing that he's so known for in so much of the New Orleans second line and other stuff that he plays. We also talk about how to make people feel joy when you play, which is something that I know Stanton does for me. He does for a lot of people. And it was really fun to talk to him about not just kind of the nerdy transcription and other stuff behind music, but really think of it from what's the point when we play music? And the point of it is usually to make people feel something. And for Stanton, making whoever's listening to his music feel joy is one of his main motivations. And we talk about how he accomplishes that. So we're going to talk about that and a whole lot more with Stanton. So let's get into it. In the second, you're going to hear from the sponsor of today's episode, Sweetwater. But for now, let's jump into this conversation with Stanton Moore. Question: do you like free stuff? Like actual free stuff, like cymbals and gear and software? Here's what I thought. And that's why I've teamed up with Sweetwater. They are sponsoring this episode of the podcast. And what that means for you is right now, you can go to the link in the description of this episode. And from right now, March 12th through April 5th, you can go to the link in the description and sign up for your chance to win a free set of Zildjian cymbals. I can't speak highly enough about Sweetwater. Years ago, when I was redoing the studio, I spent a ton of money upgrading preamps, an interface, a computer, a ton of different stuff. And I went to Sweetwater primarily because they had the best price by far. Months later, I had tech issues with some of the gear I bought that had nothing to do with Sweetwater. And when I reached out to them, they were able to put me in touch with a tech support team that not only listened to what I actually had going on, but they got me solutions that I wasn't able to find with myself. And I find that to be extremely rare with tech support. So tech support, great prices are just two of the things that I love about Sweetwater. So those are two of the reasons I love Sweetwater. And that's why I think you should go to the link in the description, head over to that page. There will be a field where you can enter your email and it will enter you for a chance to win a set of Zildjian cymbals. And while you're on that page, it's also filled with a list of different things I use in my music career every day, like plugins, sticks, cymbals, accessories, all of that stuff. And by signing up for the giveaway, or by clicking on the link in the description and purchasing anything on Sweetwater after you use that link, I get a small kickback from that at no extra cost to you, which helps really, really support the channel. And I really appreciate that. Thanks again to Sweetwater for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Now let's get into it. Man, thanks for being here.
Yeah, bro. Thanks for asking me to do it.
Absolutely. Now that we've worked together a little bit, it was always apparent to me that you were a rudimental and a transcription and a notation person. But I think what I find most interesting about you is getting to know you. You're even more into transcribing and the rudiments and the kind of what some people would look at as like the scholarly side of drumming, even more than I thought. And getting into it, it's so interesting because you are so frequently playing like New Orleans, jazz, all this stuff that requires you to play with musicality, requires you to play with feels that are like in the cracks, that are not like, that are essentially the genres you can't notate on paper as precisely as you want. So I think a lot of people get trapped when they get, down the transcription and the notation and the reading music rabbit hole. Their playing starts to sound a little rigid. It starts to sound a little hollow. And how have you taken such huge advantage of like transcription knowledge and notation and all that stuff, but also been able to, in your playing, in your recording, in your touring, and your all that stuff, be a drummer that sounds so off the page, so in the cracks?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I'm really glad that you started off with that question and are asking that question, because I think this will be interesting for a lot of people to talk about, to hear about. And the answer to the question is, for a long time, I was not like that at all. So when, I was very fortunate to study with Marty Hurley. So I got a really solid rudimental foundation from Marty. And then I heard from a lot of people, well, if you want to be a drum set player, you're going to have to loosen up, right? So I went from Marty Hurley to Johnny Vodakovich, which could not be two more polar opposite approaches. I mean, I can't think of anything more polar opposite. And so I really, once I got away from Marty, I really almost tried to forget about the rudimental knowledge that I had. And I really, really tried to loosen up. And when I would go back to Brother Martin and visit Marty, or he would see me do, I did a couple of clinics there at Brother Martin, and he got to see me play. And he would come out to some of my gigs too. But I remember one time doing a clinic and there at Brother Martin, he got to see me really close range. And he's like, man, you sound fantastic, but what are you doing with your hands? Are you trying to win an ugly hands competition? Because I was just so like barely holding onto the sticks and I was really trying to loosen up. So I think I swung over to the other side of the spectrum. The pendulum swung over so far for a while. And when I was studying with Johnny, he told me, he's like, man, don't worry about anything note for note. Like, put your own spin on stuff. Do your interpretation of that, of things, right? So I really took Johnny at his word, and anything I would learn, I would intentionally not try to learn it note for note. I would intentionally try to learn it, do my approach on it. And he would tell me, yeah, man, that's cool. Like, put your thumbprint on it, right? So he really encouraged me to do that. And because of his encouragement and his support, I just went full on with that, right? And I know some teachers and some approaches are very structured, and you have to learn these transcriptions and you have to learn in the styles of these different players. And I think that's very important. But I didn't do that until I was probably in my 30s.
Wow.
At least, maybe even into my 40s. And I got to a point where I started thinking, man, I wish I would have spent more time learning Elvin transcriptions and Philly Joe transcriptions. And then I was like, well, why not? Why can't I start doing that? And so I started to try to approach things like I was 19 years old again. And I started breaking out Elvin transcriptions that I wanted to learn, Philly Joe, even some like Brian Blade transcriptions. And I got to a point where I wasn't really transcribing these things. I would look at other people's transcriptions and then I would make notes and I would change things, but it would help me like get jump started, and I'd be like, I don't think Elvin played this that way. Or I've watched Blade a lot and, he's only 2 years older than me. So I got to see him up close a lot before people really knew who he was, right? So I'd be like, oh man, I'm really enjoying learning this. I don't think he would have played it that way. I think it might have been stuck this way. So I would make changes and stuff, but working from somebody else's transcription first really got me a head start, right? So I got much more scholastic, not until I was like in my late 30s or 40s. And I intentionally stayed away from that so that I wouldn't sound rigid or I wouldn't sound like I was biting from other specific sources. I really tried to develop my own thing for a long time. And then I was like, man, I just love learning about the drums so much. Like, why not now that I feel confident that I do kind of have my own sound? Why not go down the rabbit hole and really dig into transcriptions? And then just to kind of, answer your question a little bit further, once I started working on Groove Alchemy, which I guess was, probably started working on that right after I released Take It to the Street, which I think came out in 2005. So I probably started working on it in like 2006 or something. And it came out, I think, in 2009 or 10. But somewhere around 2007, 2008, I started realizing, man, if I'm going to do a book on funk, I really want to dive deep, and I really want to get these transcriptions right. So I really started really enjoying and really digging into transcribing myself. But up until that point, I didn't really transcribe a lot. Like with Take It to the Street, there's not a lot of other, transcriptions of other people's specific stuff. There's like a bunch of grooves and beats written out and a lot of examples, but I didn't go in and like fully transcribe any solos or stuff. And then the further I got into it, I was like, oh, well, in Groove Alchemy, I was like, well, if we're going to talk about actual proof, why don't I transcribe the whole first minute and a half? If we're going to talk about Clyde Stubblefield's Soul Pride, why don't I transcribe the whole thing? So I just went further and further into that rabbit hole and really started enjoying it. And now I love transcribing, but also too, I've, got such a full schedule. Sometimes I call on you to help me, so, and you do such a great job, man. And so thank you for that, so you've been a real asset to me, because sometimes it's like, man, I want to include a transcription on this lesson, but Tim, could you help me, because I don't have the time to do it? And so you've helped me transcribe stuff on records. You've helped me transcribe stuff that I've filmed here in my studio that I want to, release. And that's hugely helpful. And I, because I have a lot of trust in what you do, because you're really, really good. So, and I'll look at it and we work on it together. I'm like, I think this is what I was doing. And there might be some tweaks, but in general, you get it really, really good. And, I think I came to know about you from the Zildjian Live stuff in particular, where you transcribed a bunch of my stuff. I was like, man, this is super close. Like, very little do I need to change or adjust or anything. So, so that's been really, really fun and helpful, working with you in that capacity. And, we were talking about this, if you want to talk about it, if it's cool. It's like, I went and just did a tract for 9 days with a very heavy project called Corrosion of Conformity, which is, a very heavy band that they've been around for a very long time. I've been friends with Pepper Keenan, who's the main vocalist and songwriter, and we've known each other for 30 years, growing up in New Orleans. So I made a record with them in 2005, and then about 2 years ago, he started reaching out saying, hey, man, what do you think about making another record? And I said, I would love to. And so long story short, we've done a lot of sessions, some sessions in here. We did 5 days in Raleigh, 6 days in Bay St. Louis, and then 9 days just now at Dockside. And so one of the tunes I did here in my room, and I just went nuts. I went ballistic on it, right? And just played all this over-the-top stuff, and he loved it. And there were certain fills in there that he really wanted. So I sent it to you, right? And this is the demo that we did in here, which is before the demo that we did in Bay St. Louis. And then, so I sent you the one that he really dug, and you transcribed it for me. And then I would shed it in the studio during the day while we were getting sounds on whatever might be the next song. They just needed me to play. So I would work through the transcription you did, just so that I internalized all these fills that I knew they wanted somewhere. And then I didn't even look at it when I was tracking, but it really helped me. So my point is, not only do we transcribe stuff that I might have filmed or I might have put on a record, but you've helped me transcribe stuff that probably nobody will ever hear, but it helped me prepare for the session, and it was hugely helpful. And so, just to kind of give the listeners some insight into what we've been doing together and how it's been helpful. And if I have the time, I might go in and transcribe stuff. So, in 2005, when I did a record with these guys, like I was talking about, and then they wanted to do a video, of this tune called Stonebreaker, but they wanted me to know it note for note. Well, in the studio, they got me to go ballistic. So there was no fills that repeated or anything.
Yeah.
So what I did was I transcribed it myself, and then I printed it out. I went to a Kinko's and had it printed out on 4-foot wide paper, and then had it hung from lighting trusses. And I think it was like 4 or 5 pages long, so that I could there was no way I was going to be able to remember all this stuff. And so I knew it note for note, but I had to look at the paper. And so Pep was like, dude, this is crazy. He's like, people are going to flip out and wonder how we did this, because it's all, I was like totally in sync. But, so, I'm just saying all this to say like how helpful transcription has come over the years, but I didn't really start doing it until maybe later in my playing career.
Yeah. So when you transcribe now, or in the past when you've transcribed, I think another thing that people fall into, and this is what's so funny about, being what some people on the internet know is like just a transcription guy, is a lot of people, I think when they think of transcriptions, they think, man, I love Vinnie Colaiuta's playing. He's incredible. I'm just going to go learn this thing note for note, and then I'll be Vinnie Colaiuta. And it's like, no, you won't.
No, you won't.
You will know 1 or 2 things that Vinnie Colaiuta has played before, but
right.
that's not the whole picture. And
right.
I think one thing that people fall into is they go like, man, I really want to learn this genre or this style of playing, or, the stuff from this player or that player. So they learn a bunch of transcriptions, but it never really shows up in their playing. So
right.
What are some of the ways that, or it shows up in their playing and they just kind of sound like they're ripping off Stanton Moore or Vinnie Colaiuta or Brian Blade, and everyone just kind of goes like, yeah, it was a cool fill, but it doesn't really musically engage me in the same way when you see someone being themselves. So like, what are some of the ways that you've found to take a transcription, take something someone else did, study it, but then make it your own? Because you did reference that earlier of just that was kind of your workflow.
Right. And this is a fantastic question, Tim. And I'm glad that you asked this, because I think that this will help some of the listeners. So what I'll do is, when I'm learning a transcription, I slow it way down, like, 60 BPM, and maybe sometimes even slower. Sometimes I got to start something at 40 BPM or something, right? And that's okay. So I like to learn it very cleanly. I don't just like throw spaghetti at the wall and, oh, no, I messed it up. Oh, let me try again. No, I like meticulously practice one measure over and over and over. And this is a technique that I kind of picked up from Kenny Washington, because I took a couple lessons with Kenny, and he likes to take the Wilcoxon stuff, slow it way down, and practice one measure. You loop a measure over and over and over. So that's what I start doing. And then I put together 2 measures, then add a 3rd measure, then add the 4th measure. Then I try to play the whole 4-measure phrase. Then I might start increasing it gradually in tempo, right? Maybe 2 BPM, and then play it again, 2 BPM quicker. I don't like to just inadvertently speed up, right? Mm-hmm. And a thing that's really good is to practice with a gap click, and then, you can put in 3 bars of time and then a bar silence. Or if you really want to get challenging, 2 bars of time, 2 bars of silence. And that way, when you're practicing these 4-bar phrases, you're working on your time too, right? Okay, so once I get a transcription up to the whole transcription and playing it up to speed, then I'll play it to the record, right? Now, I don't wait until I have it all together like that to start doing what I'm about to talk about. So to answer your question, what I do is I take either one measure or one idea, and then I get away from the page and I just start improvising with it. And I start coming up with different variations on whatever the sticking is or whatever the rudimental idea is, different variations on the voicing, starting it in different places, right? So if it's something that's like, just take something that's like a paradiddle diddle on downbeats, right? Right? I might try it. Right? Start it. The was the one, so it started on the upbeat, right? So I might try and do things like that and just experiment with it, and then turn off the analytical mind and let the creative mind come into play. And then I might do that as part of my practicing session, and I might do that, every time I get a chance to practice for months, right? And then it might take me months to come up with my variation on an idea. And then in my playing, I try not to break out verbatim things that I've learned from somebody else. Mm-hmm. I try to play variations on things that I've internalized. And I internalize stuff by playing it almost every day. And then sometimes I'll play it to a click or play it to a gap click or play it to a tune, right? And then I'll improvise over the song, and not play the song the way it's supposed to go, but use the song as a steady time source. And then I'll try to practice that idea and my variations over that. And then I might introduce these ideas at a rehearsal. And then I might introduce it at a sound check. And then I might introduce it on the second set of a gig after everybody's, the audience is a little bit more lubricated and not paying as much attention. But, the thing not to do is to try to force note for note somebody else's idea. It's like, if you've got to internalize it yourself. And if it's an idea that is somebody else's and you really want to use that idea, that's cool, but you've got to internalize it before you introduce it in a musical situation, right? And like I said, my process for doing that is working on it over and over and over by myself. And then I might introduce it at a rehearsal, then introduce it at a sound check, then introduce it on a second set first. And, it's not that specific. It's not always exactly perfectly like that, totally. But it goes something like that, Yeah. And hopefully this will be helpful to some of your listeners, but sometimes it takes months, if not years, to where you get comfortable enough to introduce a new idea. And when you try to force it, it sounds forced. And sometimes you'll fall on your face. And, I try not to fall on my face, but sometimes if I try an idea, doesn't work out perfectly, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. You do need to push the boundaries, and otherwise you're just going to play the same old stuff all the time, But you try to get it to where the first time you break it out in a musical situation, hopefully it doesn't fall flat on its face, and you too.
Yeah, I love so much of what you just said in there. And I think, it's funny getting to transcribe and work with you. I've learned that we do, like, even just when you look at a transcription, some of the ways that you can notate stuff, it's been fun to work with you because I think not everybody understands with transcribing that it is interpretation. There are different ways you can do it. The internet wants there to be one way that's right and every other way is wrong, but that's just sometimes not how it works. And in those little moments, there have been a lot of times where I go like, oh man, that's exactly how I always thought about it. And with transcription, that's been true. And then in your answer just now, it's very true. And one of my favorite parts about what you just said is turning off the analytical side of your brain. I have a whole podcast episode about Kenny Werner's Effortless Mastery, but I think there's
I've read, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, let me just interject and say to the listeners, let's not gloss over this book. I highly recommend your listeners checking out Kenny Werner's Effortless Mastery. If you haven't checked it out yet, check it out. And, of course, to get to that point, you've got to shed a lot. And then you just have to be like, hey, I am a master. I've put in the time, but you got to put in the time, right? But I just wanted to say that thank you for mentioning that book, and I'm going to let you continue, but I didn't want to just forget to mention, check out that book.
Yeah. And I mean, I think not enough musicians talk about how it's not always helpful to be analyzing and criticizing your playing when you're playing. There's a time
Right.
for that. And there's a time where, you're shedding to a metronome, you're trying to get this thing down, you really want to make sure your timing is great or whatever, that you need to be analyzing. There's times when you're listening back to a performance and you need to be analyzing and critiquing. But in order to get to, I think you phrased it like the creative side of your brain, you have to turn that stuff off. And I think there's a lot of people that practice without ever turning that off. So then they get to a gig and they're still just sitting there critiquing. And that's when you get into the thing of you're in the audience, you're watching someone on stage play, and you're just going, man, why do I feel like there's like a wall between me and everyone on stage right now? And it's, whether it's them being too deep in a chart and not looking around and engaging with musicians, or it's just being in their head going like, oh shit, I blew that chorus. Yeah, I played that better in rehearsal. And it adds this layer of just, I can't quite emotionally engage with you right now because there's this weird thing going on.
Yeah. And, what I try to get to in my playing is get past the notes that I'm playing, get past what it is I'm playing, and try to get as close as I can to what am I trying to accomplish here with the music that I'm playing? And usually it is to make people feel something. And usually what I'm going for is to make people feel joy. And so this fill that I play right now is not, I don't want to play it to demonstrate my technical proficiency. I want to demonstrate it so somebody's going to say, whoa, that was really cool. And that made me feel joy, whether they're a drummer or a non-musician. I'm trying to get past the notes and get to the joy as directly as possible. Now, how do you do that? You got to put in time. But when I'm playing, I'm trying to connect to the joy with the musicians as directly as I can. And let me just say too, one of the things that is super helpful when you're trying to internalize, your musical ideas. One of the things that I do is, we mentioned before we were talking, I've got my man, Nick Solnick here helping me, and he helps me engineer, helps me record. Sometimes he and I, before we start recording, will be playing and he'll show me stuff he's been working on. I'll show him stuff I've been working on. Now, I might be practicing something, and he walks in the door, and instantly it gets worse. Because my point is, just one person can make you nervous. And like Nick's a really good drummer. So, if I'm not super solid in what I'm practicing, it makes it more challenging to play it in front of him. So my point is, I really dig doing that. So when he walks in, I'll be like, hey man, let me play this for you, because it's instantly going to suck more because I'm trying to impress him because I respect him. And so my point is, even if you can get with one person, one buddy, it's going to make it more challenging. And then do that. And then when you try to introduce it at a rehearsal or sound check or a gig, it's going to make it that much, you're going to get closer to that sooner. Instead of just always practicing by yourself, get together with a buddy and practice and play stuff for your buddy. And he plays stuff for me. He's like, oh man, this was better yesterday when you weren't here. He could probably hear him in the background. He says, yeah. But, so that's really valuable is my point, is getting together, even just with one guy. And if you've got one buddy, get together with him, have some coffee, get together once a week, play for each other what you've been working on. And if you can do it well in front of your one buddy, you're going to be able to be closer to being able to do it well with other people. And then you're going to get closer to being able to evoke joy when you're playing. And that's the level you got to get to. You got to know something so well backwards and forwards that you're not even thinking about it.
Yeah.
You're way past that. You're not thinking, you're trying to evoke emotion and make people feel something with the music that you're playing. And that's where you got to get to. And that's what effortless mastery is about. But to get to that, you got to put in the countless hours.
Got to put in the countless hours.
10,000 hours is just the beginning.
Yes, 10,000 hours is just the beginning. And, you know, when I think about someone like you've definitely put in the hours, and not just to, you know, master the instrument, but also, you've mentioned it a couple times, but also just craft your own sound. Like when Stanton Moore sits down at a drum kit, you know, I hear Stanton Moore. I don't hear, oh, guy's playing a rock thing. You have a sound, and it's not necessarily the way the drums are tuned. It's the way you hit. It's your time feel. It's all these things. In the same way that, you know, when you hear John Bonham play something, you go like, John Bonham. It could be just 16th notes on the snare drum, and you go like, man, that's John Bonham. So what are some of the ways that because I think a lot of people suffer from this thing of believing this myth that, like, you know, if you start committing to something, you're not committing to other things. So I think there's a lot of people that go online and they look at videos and they go like, Larnell Lewis is incredible. Dennis Chambers is amazing. Vinny Colaiuta is great, blah, blah. And they want to study all of these drummers because I love the jazz that this person does. I love the second line this person does. I like the gospel stuff this person does. And I want to do it all. And it's this myth that, like, if you have enough influences, you can do it all and you'll sound like everyone. In reality, what that really ends up doing is you just don't really sound like anyone, because you can't do all, you know, my favorite drummers cannot sound, you know, as amazing as Brian Blade is, as much as I love his playing, he wouldn't necessarily be the first person I call for like a speed metal gig, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people that get scared because what they start realizing is, well, if I'm not going to be XYZ genre or chops or whatever person, that means that I'm committing to this thing. And I think a lot of people get scared to commit to something, so they don't really ever find their own identity. And like, what are some of the ways that you've developed such a sound on top of, you know?
That's another great question. So I think for me, I focused on what moved me emotionally. So like Elvin Jones, listening to Elvin live at Birdland, that record changed my life. Like at that time I was like into, you know, I was into classic rock and punk rock, and I was, you know, playing some bands that were focused on like punk and, you know, kind of a punk approach to funk. And, you know, I was in a band called Captain Meathead, right? And we were trying to sound like a mix between the Minutemen and, you know, Jimi Hendrix, Are You Experienced, you know? And you know, we were freaking 17-year-old kids, you know? Maybe I started in that band when I was 16. But my point is, when I heard Elvin Jones at that time, at the age of 16 or 17 years old, I was like, oh my God, he's playing with the ferocity and the energy of punk before punk. And he's just playing with just limitless abandon, right? And he's not afraid. And he's playing with this fearlessness and this emotional, you know, this level of emotional expression that just instantly grabbed me. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I had found that kind of emotional, you know, that draw. I was drawn to the playing of John Bonham for that same reason. And also around the same time, the playing of Zigaboo Modaliste. Those three guys are completely different, but they affect me all equally emotionally. So when I was growing up, I decided, I realized, and maybe, you know, teachers of mine had told me, like, you cannot learn everything. Like, you can't learn everything. So focus on what you really want to learn. And so at an early age, I was like, well, with Elvin, you know, you can swing, you can play ballads, you can, you know, play all this beautiful stuff. With Bonham, you can rock out, and with Zig, you can play funk. And those styles of music really moved me emotionally. So those guys kind of became for me, my holy trinity. And they still are to this day. I can't listen to anybody else that moves me more than those guys, right? Equally, but those guys, even like we keep mentioning Brian Blade, like with those three guys, with Elvin, that, you're really understanding where Blade is coming from,
Totally.
And then with Dave Grohl, I love Dave Grohl's playing. I'm talking about more current people. But if you understand John Bonham, you understand Dave Grohl, not all of it, but I'm saying you can understand the roots of all that. So those three guys continually, if you understand Zigaboo Modelys, then you understand it doesn't get any funkier than that. It can get maybe as funky, but not funkier, So, and Clyde Stubblefield, Jabo Starks, Bernard Purdy, I love all of the guys too, and equally. But I'm saying if you got to condense it to three things that will really help you be a very versatile player. For me, it was those three, right? So I had to decide, okay, I'm not going to listen to all this other stuff that doesn't move me emotionally, right? So there was music at that time in the, mid to late 80s when this was happening, that I realized, that's not really moving me emotionally, and I can't learn everything. So I'm going to focus on this stuff that is moving me emotionally, right?
Yeah.
And that's the way I approached it, right? I had to actively decide not to listen to stuff. So there are, certain radio stations or, things I would not listen to, certain records I wouldn't buy, certain things I would not check out because I didn't want that to encroach into my approach, right?
Yeah.
And so it was very deliberate. It was a deliberate decision. I'm not going to listen to this stuff, and I'm not going to let it enter my ears, right?
Yeah.
I've got to stay focused on this. And especially when I was younger, that was very challenging. If you were in a relationship and your, girlfriend wants to listen to, certain types of music, and I'm like, I can't let that get in my ears, And now that I've developed my own sound, I'm much more lax about it. My wife and I listen to all kinds of stuff, but when I was developing, I was very focused on that and very deliberate and very like, I got to get out of this place because that stuff is getting into my ears, right?
Yeah. I think people sometimes look at people that are ahead of them on the musical journey and don't realize some of the, sacrifice seems like kind of a dramatic word for this topic, but, all the little decisions and all the when I was in college, there was a lot of nights spent in a practice room, not out doing what other college people were doing. And I think sometimes people take that for granted, that sometimes you do have to make a lot of tough decisions because, like you said, you can't do it all. And we've kind of been talking about it on the music front, but I think another thing when I look at your career that is super interesting is you've had a long career. Like, you've been doing this and you've seen the music industry and the drummer educator space along with the music industry morph several times over. And I think, everybody has to make really hard decisions because, again, you can't do everything. And there's naturally just going to be stuff that you want to do but can't do. And there's going to be stuff that you don't want to do but you have to do. So how throughout your career have you balanced kind of, I like to always frame it as like art versus commerce, because everybody would love to just get paid $1 million a day to just make the music that they love. But it turns out that it's exceptionally rare for people to get paid millions of dollars to just sit in a room by themselves and make music that they love. Sometimes you got to play gigs that you don't want to do, but this month rent is due. And sometimes you have to expand some of your skills where you go like, you know what? it's not really natural to me to do XYZ, but I got to figure out a way to do it because this is the way that things are headed. So how have you navigated kind of the art and commerce of it all?
Yeah. So for me, I predominantly in my career have started bands. So, I started bands like when I was 14 years old, I started like having guys come over to the house and we would practice in my bedroom. And then I played my first gig out at the age of 16 years old. And it was, with a band called The Wrath of James. And we were writing original music and we tried to sound like the Smiths, right? But it was writing original music. And then from there, I went to the band Captain Meathead. From there, I was in a band called Oxen Thrust. And then, of course, I was playing other gigs. I was playing a lot of New Orleans trad gigs, right? Traditional jazz gigs. I was in a band called Entourage, which played a lot of originals, and it was kind of a fusion band, right? And then I played in a band called New Orleans Klezmer All-Stars that wrote a lot of originals, and it was a New Orleans approach, high energy New Orleans approach to klezmer music, which is Eastern European Jewish folk music, right? But every single one of those bands played predominantly 75% or more original material. And then I started playing with Galactic, and then we started touring. And, most people listening to this might be familiar with that trajectory. We bought my parents' 1978 Ford Econoline van, okay? We bought that van in 1996 and started touring, and we averaged 100 dates a year for 25 years until COVID hit, right? And we did our 25th anniversary East Coast tour, came home for a couple, a week or two or whatever, and then had to cancel our West Coast 25th anniversary tour because of COVID, right? But my point is, even in between Galactic, I started bands with Charlie Hunter, right? Charlie Hunter, Skerritt, Mike Dillon. We did Garage à Trois. And then also with Marco Benevento, we had a version of Garage à Trois. And then Dragon Smoke, which is a band I started with Ivan Neville, Eric Lindell, and Robert Mercurio. And so Dragon Smoke does maybe, 10, 15 gigs a year. Garage à Trois hasn't done much lately, but we were doing 30, 40 gigs a year. Now I've got an organ trio with Eric Krasno, right? I've got an organ trio. That band is Krasno Moore Project with Eric Finland on organ. I've got an organ trio with Robert Walter, Will Bernard. I put out 3 records with that trio. I've got a piano trio with David Torkanowski and James Singleton. And now I've got an organ trio with Joe Ashlar. We've got rotating members. Now, between my piano trio and my organ trio and all that, I've got 9 records under my own name. And that's not including Garage à Trois or Dragon Smoke or Galactic or any of that. That's, so my point is I also have, a solo career where so my point is I have kind of made the phone ring in a way. Like I don't wait for people to call and be like, oh, okay, well, I've got 4 weddings this weekend. I wish I was doing something else. It's like, I haven't, I used to play weddings when I was younger, but I haven't been doing that because I don't have the time because I'm in so many other bands, So I do get calls like to play with people. I'm going to play this weekend coming up with Les Claypool. And then, I just tracked this record with Corrosion of Conformity I was telling you about. And then, occasionally get calls to play with Leo Nositelli and George Porter Jr., half of the original Meters. Like, that's one of the calls that I get. And Ivan Neville on organ, right? That's one of the calls that I get where I'm like, man, like to me, like I know that might not be like, playing in front of 40,000 people, to me, that's more important than playing in front of 40,000 people.
Totally.
I mean, if you're from New Orleans, like the Meters are like the Beatles of New Orleans, right?
Yeah.
So I get to play with half of the Beatles, dude. It's crazy for me. It's the greatest thing you could ever possibly imagine as being a kid from New Orleans. I get to play with the most influential band of all time from New Orleans. Half of them. It's incredible. So it's like I'm exactly where I want to be, playing the music I want to be playing, whether it's in bands I'm in or the calls that I'm getting. And I guess it's just because I have focused on what I want to do. And then when you just do that, you don't have time for much else, When we first started touring with Galactic, we were doing almost 200 dates a year,
Yeah.
And I didn't have much time for anything else. Now, we were broke, but I was like, man, if I stick with this, I think it'll eventually develop, And so that's kind of what I did. So I'm not saying that's going to work for everybody, but that's what I did. And that's how I've been able to balance the art and commerce, is that I focused on the art, I guess, until it made commerce.
Yeah, and I love that, so much of your story has happened because, there's a reason why they reached out to you to play with, two members of the Meters, and it's because you're very crystal clear on like your thing. You're not showing up as someone and trying to be something different or trying to be everyone. You're like, this is my thing, and it's going to attract the people that are into that thing. And when you're specific about that, it gives people an opportunity. It's like in a way your art is so crystal clear, it has clarified the marketing of it. A lot of people, their marketing is confusing, so people don't quite know like what's for sale here. But when you show up with how much you've developed your sound and how consistent it is, people just go like, oh, I know exactly what this product is. And I know exactly where it can go.
Well, and thank you for saying that. And, my focus has been to play music that moves me emotionally, right? And be passionate about that. And then there's a lot of music that moves me, right? So I'm fortunate to, have put out a piano trio record where I'm playing brushes and playing ballads on that, right? And then I played on an Irma Thomas record, right? And I mentioned that because now we have Irma Thomas playing with Galactic. Our new Galactic record that is coming out April 10th, we've dropped 2 singles already, and it's got Irma Thomas on the whole record. This is the first all-vocal record we've done. So I'm, got a new record coming out with Irma Thomas, and I played on a record that was under her name, and that record won a Grammy, right? So, I love playing brushes. I love playing ballads. I love swinging out. I love all that. So that's one side of the spectrum for me. And then, as we were talking about, I just got back Saturday from 9 days working on a heavy record. Pepper Keenan calls, he says, we're playing heavy metal. And, it's very Black Sabbath, ZZ Top influenced, right?
Yeah.
So it's like hard, heavy rock, right? And I love it, but it's not like I'm getting asked to play speed metal, thrash metal, or anything like that. I'm, again, being asked to be me.
Yeah.
Which is just awesome. So in some ways, I feel like, man, it's so great that I got called to be me on Irma's record. I get called to be me on heavy metal records. It's like, they want that to be like a mix between John Bonham, Bill Ward, and a caffeinated, aggressive, ballistic approach to that, right? And so I'm like, I can do that, So it's cool, but all that stuff moves me, man. To this day, man, you put on a Black Sabbath record, and I freaking jump out of my skin. It's so awesome, And you put on a John Coltrane or any Elvin record, and I jump out of my skin. And those couldn't be more different, but they're still groove based. I mean, Elvin to me is groove based. I mean, his swing in his pocket is just it's just grooving to me, And so often blues based as well. So it's like groove based, blues based music is what ties all these things together that move me, right? It's not like I'm playing, things that are completely different. I'm not playing like Indian classical music and then speed metal, right? It's like the things that I'm doing are all pretty groove based, and then I get to be myself within those things.
Yeah. Really quick. You mentioned Elvin and his time feel. And I think something that I would love to hear how you think about swing, because I think there's a lot of people, again, going back to beginning of this conversation, talking about working from transcriptions or whatever. There's a lot of people who, they're straight eights and then they're swung. And that's not really true. There's a lot of in between. So how do you, it's kind of a big question, but how do you think about swing, especially in genres where it isn't straight eighth note or sextuplet swing? It's that somewhere in the cracks, somewhere in the middle. And because I think a lot of people maybe struggle to find consistency with that or find exactly how to dial it in. Like sometimes I actually dial it in by thinking of like how you would in Pro Tools, like percentage of swing. And sometimes I visually think about, taking, if it's sextuplet swing, you're playing the first, third, fourth, and sixth partial of this sextuplet triplet. The eighth notes don't move, but those third and sixth partial, you can kind of, I sometimes visually think about sliding them around, and like that is how you swing. If I have to think about it at all, and that has helped some of the people that have taken lessons with me and whatever, but how do you think about swing and all of its percentages and subtleties?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And what I do is I will, like, let's take for example, since you're talking about swing, let's take the ride cymbal pattern, right? So spang, spang-a-lang, 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 ding, da-ding, ding, da-ding, ding. That's terrible. Ding, da-ding, ding, da-ling, spang-a-lang, 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 spang-a-dang, stack-a-da, stack-a-goo, gag-a-goo, get-ya, gag-a-doo, get-ya, boom. Now, in between straight and swing, that'll give you like a sidewinder, boogaloo type of thing. And that could be cool, right? I think, gag-a-goo, gag-a-goo, get-ya, gag-a-doo, get-ya, da-da-doo, da-da, gag-a-doo, da-da, gag-a-doo. Right? No, that's not straight. Ding, da-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dum. Okay? So let's take and move through the spectrum. Spang-a-lang, 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 spang-a-lang. That's too straight. That doesn't work, right? So I think spang-a-lang, spang. That's about where you want to be. Spang-a-lang, spang-a-lang, ting-ta-ding, ting-ta-ding, ting-ta-ding. So I would literally take a stick and play it on the ride cymbal and record myself. Ting, ting, ta-ding, 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 spang. That's about where you want to be. Spang-a-lang, sa-da-da, sa-da-da, sa-da-da. That's in between. That could be useful for some stuff. Da-da-da, ding-da-ding, ding-da-ding, ding-da. That's too straight. Now, if you can control all of that, I don't always think of it as the subdivisions. I just have memorized what feels good for what situations, right? Now, one of the things that some people talk about, to use your sextuplet analogy, quintuplets, right? So using quintuplets, so if you're like, so I'm playing right, left, left, right, left, right? Very evenly, very evenly. Right? That's giving my right hand in between straight and swing. So I didn't used to think about it that way, but some people do think about it that way, to get in between and get that Jay Dilla thing and all that kind of stuff. And I've talked about this a lot with my buddy Ash Sohn, who's really good at doing all that stuff. And I just love Ash. He's amazing, right? So now I'm aware of that. Like, you can do that So you're playing the first and fourth partials of the quintuplet, and that will give you kind of an in-between straight and swing kind of thing that'll get you there. But I haven't thought about it like that until recently. I think about it from years and years and years of getting in between straight and swing. So, if here's straight, now I'm starting to go through the spectrum. Now we're in a shuffle, and I'm over swinging on purpose. Now we're in between. Now we're straight again. Right? So I work through that spectrum and then record myself. It's very, very useful to record yourself, as you know, but I'm saying this for the listeners. And then because I've had this happen when I was first starting to try to play in between straight and swing, playing funk, I thought I was sounding good, and a buddy of mine came and heard me play, and he was like, yeah, but you're swinging everything too much. I was like, what are you talking about, man? I sound good. I'm getting my thing together. And I listened back to a gig tape, and I was like, oh, man, I'm swinging everything too much. So then I had to learn that I had to play it almost what I thought was too straight, but it sounded killing. And I learned about that by recording myself.
Yeah.
Recording myself in practice and recording myself on the gigs.
Yeah, recording yourself is so helpful because how you sound in your brain is not necessarily how it sounds to the outside world. And you got to make sure that sometimes, like you're saying, sometimes you're playing it swung and it feels good. But when you listen back, you go, okay, so now I know if it's feeling like that swing, I probably should dial it back a little bit. And yeah, that can be tough, especially when you're first starting out, because you're just happy that stuff's working and you're able to play that groove you've been shedding and whatever. And then the next level is making sure that it's all plugging into the outside world in the way that you think it is, because it's not always true. And yeah, I think like you said earlier, having references for stuff can also be really helpful. Like there's certain, 16th note, slightly swung grooves that I kind of go through in a Rolodex in my head of like, oh, that's like, it needs that thing, in the same way that, there's certain drum parts just in general that I have references for, and that can be super helpful. Okay. I don't want to take up too much of your time. So before we go, I want to ask, like, what do you have coming up? We've talked about a little bit of what you have coming up, but what do you have coming up? Where can people find you? All of that stuff. Yeah.
People can find me on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel that I've been contributing a lot to and really trying to grow that. So Nick, as we've been talking about, he's been helping me film with that. And Mark Wessels has been helping me with that too. I've been filming stuff, sending it to him. He's been editing and putting notation up for me. And so it's been fun to work with Mark on that. And for the listeners, Mark was the longtime educational director for Zildjian, and then before that for Vic Firth, and Zildjian bought Vic Firth, and then he was working with both companies for years, and now he's helping me with both my YouTube stuff.
And Mark, technically the person that connected us,
Yeah, exactly. Totally, yeah. And then he had been telling me about you for years, and then I'm so glad that we're working together now. And then also my drum academy, Stanton Moore Drum Academy. So if you want to take a deep dive into all of my stuff that I offer, all my video lessons and PDF lessons and ebooks and courses are all available at StantonMooreDrumAcademy.com. And you can subscribe, and that gives you access to all of that material, which is quite a lot. But if you're interested in stuff that I've played, it's all in there. And then I also do a monthly Zoom with my members inside of Stanton Moore Drum Academy. So you've got direct access to me, and that's the way to really connect with me, is through the Drum Academy. I also do a drum camp in December, which is on sale now. I've only got a few spots left. It's in December, and it's almost sold out. So that's a lot of fun. That's become like a family reunion of sorts now. A lot of people come every year and they get to see each other. And of course, I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well. And, different things for different stuff. Instagram, Facebook are shorter clips, YouTube's longer clips. But Stanton Drum Academy is full on all the courses and all the video lessons and stuff that you might want to see from me are all in there.
Yeah. Amazing. Man, well, thank you so much for coming on. And it's been so fun to work with you. It's a dream come true, not just because I really respect your playing, but also just because you're such a knowledgeable transcription person yourself. And for things like we did one recently together, there was a bunch of buzz rolls in there. And I've always been like, I don't know, man, you just tie them together. You put some Z's in there, like call it a buzz roll. And it's just been cool to learn from someone who's spent a lot more time in like certain intricate things like that. It's been so fun to learn how you think about it, because a lot of it I'm just like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. I should just do it like that.
Awesome. Well, yeah, man. I mean, it's been great for me to work with you. Like I said, it's been, a huge asset, like, and a big help. It's like, man, I wish I had time to transcribe this. It's like, oh, let me see if Tim can help me with this. And you do, and you knock it out of the park every time. And I'm really enjoying it, and I'm learning a lot too. And, not that we need to mention it, but, a lot of people, maybe some of the listeners might find this helpful. As we know, like Finale decided to stop existing, and now you're helping a lot of people make the transition to Dorico. And I started watching your video the other day, and, you're going to be helping me with that, so I appreciate it in advance.
Yeah, man. I'll never forget that day of just how many texts I got from all kinds of different people of just like, what's happening? And now what do we do? And yeah, that's,
right.
Hopefully there's not too many of those throughout my career where a program I use every single day just disappears overnight. But
yeah,
so far
crazy.
so good.
Yeah. Well, good deal, man. Well, I feel honored that you would ask me to do your podcast. You do a great job with the podcast. It sounds great. I've checked it out a little bit, and I'm really happy to be on it. And hopefully your listeners dig what we've been talking about.
Oh, I'm sure they do, man. And thank you again.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much, Tim.